All right, welcome back to part 2 of EDSE 457, session 4, and we just covered some of the characteristics of good, effective, and successful readers. So let's shift our discussion into comprehension a little bit. So when we talk about reading comprehension, we generally talk about two processes. So the first is text-based processing, and when we refer to text-based processing, we're talking about the reader primarily trying to take the information from the text. So you're starting with the text. So when you're choosing strategies or when you're thinking about how you're going to teach, remember, content informs process. So when you're thinking about the process piece, you're thinking about the text. So you're starting from the text and then kind of how the reader is going to make sense of that text, starting with the text. Then you also have knowledge-based processing, and that's when you're thinking about the individual readers, so what the reader brings to the text. So that takes into consideration the aspects that some of the aspects we talked about before, the prior knowledge and the experiences that reader is going to bring to the interpretation of the text. So those kind of they work together. So when you look at, which we're not going to obviously in this class, but when you look at some of the interactive processing models for how people interpret text, combining text-based processing and knowledge-based processing is what we call an interactive model, right? So it goes back and forth. A reader can't only interact with the text by trying to take that information without bringing their own prior knowledge and experiences to that interpretation. So it's interactive. So the experience or the experience of reading and the interaction between the reader and the text goes back and forth, right? So it comes text first and then reader first, and it meets somewhere in the middle there. So I keep talking about strategies, right? When we're talking about reading comprehension, and when we're talking about content area reading, and when we're talking about the selection of strategies. So really what I'm referring to is what we call explicit strategy instruction. And so you did read a little bit about this. So think for a second, what is meant when we say teaching strategies explicitly? What that means is that we share with students what exactly to do, why they should be doing it, how they should do it, and when they should do it. So you also probably keep hearing me say, strategic reading, or having a student strategically select strategies. When we spend time teaching students some of these strategies for how they can approach text and how they can interact with text, we teach them explicitly, right? We actually spend time not just teaching the content that we need them to learn, but we teach them strategies for unlocking that content through text. So here's an example. So rather than just telling students to read, pages 100 through 105 and summarize what they've read, I spend time at some point in the year teaching them how to summarize, right? I teach them why you would summarize, how you would summarize, and when they should summarize. I probably am going to need to teach this explicitly several times, and I do this in class, in a lesson, do it explicitly, so that later on, this is a strategy that they have that hopefully can become something that they use independently when I give them text, or when they're given text by anybody, or when they get to college level courses and they're not provided any of that support when engaging with the text. And we know, because we're good readers, that summarizing is a really effective strategy for reading complex material, right? So I can't assume that my students know how to summarize. I actually need to spend time teaching them how you summarize text. Rather than telling my students, let's say, just to read, let's say, this poem or this selection or this journal entry and compare it to something that we read last week, I actually spend some time explicitly teaching them why, how, and when you make comparisons. So I'm going to model this. I'm going to do it with them. I can't just rest on the assumption that my students know how to make an effective, good comparison. So I actually teach this. So when we're talking about teaching strategies explicitly, these are two examples of what I mean by that. And the advantage here to students, and the advantage to you as a content area teacher, if you focus on strategies explicitly, is that your students are going to be able to unlock more of the content, right? So helping them with these reading comprehension strategies for understanding and interpreting text, is going to go a long way in helping them actually pull the content out and understand what they read. So an essential part of reading is making meaning from that reading. And the more strategies you have to make meaning, the more you're going to learn about your content, regardless of the content. So if you're teaching poetry, you're reading a novel, you're teaching science, you're teaching art, you're teaching a foreign language, the more strategies they have in their toolkit, the better they are going to be able to access their content. Oh, look at that. I took this from two different presentations, which is why now it's switched my animations. Okay, so we're talking about BDA, right? So you saw that referenced in your reading. You see that referenced in the Iris Peabody module. So this idea that there's 3 dimensions to reading. So the reading process, we call it in the field of reading. And that's the first dimension. So this is your B. This is the before reading. So pre-reading, or what we call into-reading strategies. So kind of the idea behind doing pre-reading strategies is to activate or build any prior knowledge that students have or need to engage with the text and the content, and to help them set a purpose for reading. So you read about the importance of determining purpose for reading, and when we meet in person next session, I have a fun activity for us to do about setting purpose and why it's so important. Then you've got your second dimension. So this is the D. This is the during reading, and this is the active reasoning phase of reading, what we call through reading. And this is what I was talking about before when I discussed, when you read, you monitor your own comprehension, you ask questions, you make predictions, you go back and stop when you don't understand something, you try to clarify. So this is when the reader is actively communicating with the text, and the new information that they are encountering is tested against their background knowledge. So what was uncovered or built during that first dimension. Then we move into the third dimension, or the after reading piece. So this is our post reading time, and this is the assimilation of the new information that they learned, fitting into the schema that they already possess for the subject, or for the background knowledge that you built with them. This is time for them to assess their learning and their understanding, and to kind of accommodate for any dissonance in what they previously knew about the topic, thought they knew about the topic, and then what they actually learned about the topic. So you've got these 3 dimensions. So your before, your during, and your after, right? So this is your before, this is your during, and this is your after. So let's talk about some strategies then for before reading, right? So you read about some of those strategies for activating prior knowledge in Chapter 6. So these are your B, and these are going to be important to remember for our BDA lesson and your reading comprehension lesson. So one of those was anticipation guides. And so if you want to flip right now to your text in page 182, you'll see some examples and discussions of anticipation guides. I guess the examples actually start on page 183. So thinking about the purpose of an anticipation guide, right? So you use it as both a pre-reading, a B strategy, and a post, you can use it as a during reading and a post-reading strategy. So you can use it as a B, a D, and an A strategy. What it helps to do is it helps to focus the student's attention during reading. It forces students to kind of reread for proof and support about what they thought before they read. It's really good for content area reading because you can really help set the stage. And it's also really good for students that you have in the class who may have, prior knowledge or have some existing schema for the topic, but they don't feel like activating it. And we find that in middle school and high school, right? Kids that just don't feel like doing their work or don't feel like thinking about the topic. So if you take a look at page 183 in your text, you'll see they give you these two examples. So it was anticipation guides for a Civil War lesson and an anticipation guide for cliches about weather. Essentially, with the anticipation guide, what you do is the teacher generates statements about what students are about to read, and you have students respond to those statements in some way before they read. So you and they're going to anticipate how much they know or how much they're prepared to do the reading. So you'll see, like the one for the cliches about weather, you're asking the students to decide whether or not they believe these are likely or unlikely in terms of having scientific basis. If you look at the ones for the Civil War lesson, they're asking them to decide whether or not they think these differences would be likely to describe a rebel or a Yankee, so the North or the South in terms of the Civil War. So for you as a teacher, it's great because it gives you some information about what they know. For students, it gives them an idea of what they feel they might know, they don't know. They can go back to it during the reading, look for evidence that either supports what they put or provides evidence for why they were wrong, and then you can then review it and have them do it again at the end. All right, KWL. So that's on page 206 of your text. KWL is essentially having students create a chart of what they already know about the subject, what they would like to know, so having them generate some questions, and then they go back at the end and fill in what they've learned. So I'm going to put out to you right in the beginning that this, in my opinion and the opinion of many, is a very overused strategy. So this is something that we want students to do automatically when they approach text, which is why it is a strategy. So when students look at a piece of text or are given a piece of text, you want them to automatically think about, what do I already know? What do I want to get from this? Or what do I need to learn? What do I need to know? And then at the end, they should be thinking about what they did learn. So it's good to chart these assumptions and to have the students ask the questions about the things they want to learn. But what I have found, and what many find in practice, is that that last piece is often left off. So the strategy itself doesn't work very well unless you do have that time to go back and have students chart in what they actually learned and check that against some of the questions that they had and then the information that they already knew or thought they knew. So much like the process of the anticipation guide, this strategy is most effective when you use all three pieces. What you see in classrooms a lot is big posters made that have the K filled in and have the W filled in, and then they have the L blank. So this is actually a strategy I am not going to allow you to do for your BDA lesson because I think there are others that are more effective. Another is an expectations outline. So you can see an example of that on page 189 in your text. So what an expectations outline does is it allows students to preview the material. You, as a class, develop this expectation outline where students tell you what they expect to learn from reading the text. You have them state these in the form of a question. They make connections between these expectation questions, and then what students do is this helps set the purpose for why they're reading. They're reading to help answer the questions that they thought the material was going to be about. So really important in terms of setting purpose, a really good before reading strategy. Establishing problematic perspectives. So you can find an example of this on page 176 of your text. Essentially, the teacher just presents a problem, gives students some time to discuss, raise questions, ponder possible solutions, and then when they actually get to read, what the reading material should do is help them come to a resolution, kind of about what they didn't understand or the questions they had about the text, or help them confirm or fill in what some of their possible solutions could have been. So it's another interesting kind of inquiry style pre-reading activity. So our next screencast is going to talk about the second dimension. So what you do during the D section, the during reading piece. So pick that up on screencast 3.